cybersecurity and crisis management have been intertwined, especially in the last couple of decades, with the proliferation of cyber studies as a global field. Avoiding a cyber crisis often comes down to properly managing a cyber incident before, during, and after it unfolds. In the context of COVID-19, there's plenty to be said on the role of cybersecurity crisis management, including effective preparation, crisis management lifecycle, response to COVID-19, and recovery, including some key policy recommendations for the post-crisis period. To that extent, we have 4 distinguished speakers with us tonight, 2 of which will join a bit later. Mr. Muntasir Budeir is the first one, who is the COO of Security Matters, which is a specialist IT security organization headquartered in Saudi Arabia. He'll be talking about cybersecurity, what is cybersecurity and what are its concerns and objectives. Followed by Mr. Andrew Seneforth, Director of Sahar Europe, a non-resident fellow in counterterrorism at Trends. Welcome again, and thank you so much for being with us tonight. I think we can dive right into the first presentation. On a technical note, I just want to say that all presentations will be 15 minutes each, followed by a Q&A session at the end. And I'd like to encourage all of our audience to submit questions during this session. Mr. Budeir, I think you can take the podium.
Thank you very much, Mina. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone, and pleasure to be here. Let me just share my screen, and then we can get started. Okay, I hope everyone can actually see my screen in here.
Yes, it's perfect.
Oops. No. Let me just go to the beginning. Okay, I'll start by talking about cybersecurity, and here we're talking about the securing your information and business. These are the main objectives of cybersecurity. As Amina said, my name is Muntasir Budeir. I'm the CEO of Security Matters. I've been working in the US, Europe, and the Middle East in the last 20 years, back and forth, consulting and providing information security and cybersecurity advisory services, security awareness, training, and so on around the region. I'm happy to be here sharing my knowledge and experience around the region and again globally through this session. And we'll go ahead and get started with what is cybersecurity and why do we all care about it. There are so many different terminologies that come across. We talked way back about IT security, then we started talking about information security, and then now we're using the buzzword of cybersecurity. In a nutshell, cybersecurity is specialized in the practice of protecting system networks, programs from digital attacks. Information security focused on securing your information and making sure that all what it takes to make sure that the information, which is an important asset of any organization, is secure. IT security was focusing more toward the IT infrastructure security. But if you look at all of them, okay, these different terminology, these different concepts, they're all trying to protect the organization and the most important asset within the organization. And in order to do that, more than one element or component has to be aligned together in order for you to succeed in getting the objectives of cybersecurity. The main one we always concentrate on having technology implemented or purchased to protect us. But in the last 15, 20 years, we've come across that realization that technology by itself does not solve the cybersecurity challenge, that we need other elements. We need to empower our people. We also need to make sure that we have the processes and procedures in place so that the people who are now more aware, more educated, trained to use these technology are also using them efficiently through efficient processes and procedures. If you combine these together, if you get these to work in tandem together, you will achieve the best outcome of cybersecurity. Now, why do we care too much about security? Why cybersecurity buzzword, information security is now a very important discussion point, even at the board level of organization, at the highest level of each country nowadays? It's because one, it's majorly in the news. Every day we're hearing some kind of a attack happening. I took some excerpts from news in 2018, 2019, 2020, and all of those are happening every day, and you're hearing more and more about it. These attacks can be as simple as attacking a small organization or a large organization, but it could be on a national level. It could be against critical infrastructure like electricity, chemical organization, oil, all these elements that constitute a critical infrastructure for the country. So it is now more of a national security that we have to worry about it, not just from a business perspective or an individual perspective, which are important, but now it's even more. Now add to it the COVID-19 now, which is the challenge that we're having here. This is the reason why we have this e-discussion and the discussion between the panelists. My colleagues will actually address it more from a COVID perspective, but here I'm introducing why do we care about security? Why is it important? And the reality are the numbers globally. When we are talking about breaches, hacking, we average cost for a data breach is almost $3.9 million. That is a huge amount of money. And if you add it up, it will be in the billions. So it is huge financial impact. That obviously attracts the attention of the CEOs, the CFOs, the organizations, and even the countries, because it's now economical as well as business-wise. Reality, though, the reason why we spend more time, effort, and money on cybersecurity, and why is it actually becoming the center of our discussion these days, it goes to the fact, again, the hacking, all these news, the fact that there are new hacking tools, they're widely available because now with the internet, it's so easy to actually get a hacking tool. Even kids can actually get a hacking tool and practice. That's what we call them, script kiddies. But there are also more sophisticated hackers and threat actors that we sometimes call them hacktivists. The hacktivists are those who are hacking for a cause. We also have those who are professionals. They're usually hacking to try and gain money. But there are also hackers who are much more sophisticated. They are usually enemy hackers or state-sponsored hackers. Sometimes we call them e-soldiers. Basically, they are more equipped. They're usually getting involved in the cyber war that is happening today. So that sophisticated hacking capability is making it more dangerous, and we're spending more time on that. Reality also, the fact that we are now in the digital world, we're talking always now about digital transformation. And COVID-19 now is actually pushing us even further and faster toward the digital transformation. The new IoTs, Internet of Things, all of this coupled with the rising cost of these breaches and the fact that the more open you are, the more risk you're exposed to. That is why cybersecurity is there. However, in the last 10, 15 years, since I've been delivering CISSP, ISO courses, and so on, I always stressed to people that the hacking and the news and the loss of money is important, and it will attract attention, but in my opinion, it will attract attention on a shorter time frame. The one that will make the real focus is having the regulations and laws. This is apparent when we work in the States. There are lots of regulations and laws that pushes organization and government agency to spend time and money and effort on the information security and cybersecurity. In the Middle East, in the last 5 to 8 years, my experience is that this is getting a lot more momentum, where in the UAE, you had NISA, who's established the information security assurance. We have in Saudi, we have the National Cyber Security Agency, the NCA, putting the ACC frameworks. We have the international standard of ISO 27001, PCI, payment card industry. All these regulations / laws are the one, in my opinion, that is putting the cybersecurity at the center stage for all organizations. Add to it now the COVID-19, the fact that now we're working from home, the fact that we're forced to work from home on a much faster, when some organizations did not even prepare themselves for it, that added to the urgency of cybersecurity, and it is, in my opinion, just will grow even more. Just as quick statistics from the GCC is that we're seeing a lot of spam messages. Over 900,000 spam messages. We're getting lots of malicious URLs inside those spam messages, and we're getting a lot of malware, malicious software. That just tells you that hackers and the bad threat actors, they don't just relax, or they don't get quarantined when you are sitting at home. On the opposite, they're trying to take advantage of it. So we have to spend more time and be more aware when we're dealing with it. Having said that, the element that I talk about is, so what do we do? How do we face it? There's so many things that we're going to be talking about during this session between me and my colleagues, but I always say that cybersecurity, information security, the best control for it is the awareness of people. That's why I'm doing this session. That's why, even though some of you might already know all of this, it is still important to remind myself of these basic threats that we need to be aware of and know how to avoid them. We talk about social engineering and phishing. They're related to each other. When we talk about social engineering, it's that attack that is not against your systems or computers or network, okay? It is against the people element, and trying to hack the people, hacking the mind of people to make them reveal sensitive information they shouldn't be usually doing. That's simply what social engineering. It is using tricks, fraud to try and make people reveal sensitive information. Phishing is just another example of a technical example of social engineering, because the traditional way for social engineering used to be over the phone. Simply a hacker will call, pretend to be somebody else. They'll try to trick you by talking your language, telling you that there is some information, something that you could gain. They use tricks in order for them to gather information. Well, phishing is just another form of social engineering, but it is done through the mechanism usually of emails. We have smishing, which is through SMS, and so on. Phishing is simply sending a message that is usually trying to attract you to click on a link on it. And that's really the bait. That's how they phish you. So that is a very common one. 76% of organizations said that they've been attacked or experienced phishing. A lot of people are seeing that. It is one of the major threat vectors that are happening and continue to happen. And again, today with the COVID-19, that's why we're reminding you of it. Phishing email messages that come in trying to tell you, for example, you won $1 million, or you have to update your profile, and they send it to you as if it's coming from a bank, or it is from your credit card company. They are usually trying to entice you to click on a link. Never do that. Make sure that you don't click on the link. And if you have to update your bank, go to the normal way. That is the best practice for it. Now, we talk also about ransomware. Ransomware as well is another attack that utilizes phishing. But usually ransomware, it uses spear phishing. A spear phishing is a specific targeted attack. Instead of just sending emails to everyone, I'll send it to a specific person. I know their interest, and I will send them a very specific email that is of interest to them. When they click on it, it's not just that it will insert a malware, it will usually go and encrypt the information and the data on the person's computer, make it inaccessible. And when it is inaccessible, what happens? You need it. And when you need this information, They actually send you a message saying, pay this much. So that's where the ransom, they ask you to pay money in order to unlock the, the encryption, and that's how they get most people. So it is related to phishing, and ransomware was very, very common in the last 3-4 years. WannaCry was one of the major ones. Again, how do we avoid those or minimize the risk from it? We have to really be vigilant. We have to be careful. So I always say, think before you click. Anytime you see links in an email attachment, usually don't even click on those. Ignore them. Okay? Fight the temptation, I call it. Don't click. If you have to click, be careful. Check this out. And if it is from an unknown source, even be more careful about it. Another element in terms of security and awareness, mobile security. Now, all of us are using in the digital transformation age. In this day, we're working from home, we're using mobiles, we're using our iPads, our mobile devices in general. And the security of those is a very important element of the security of the organization. If you're using your mobile device to connect to your organization, you're using VPN, you need to make sure that the mobile itself is secure. Now, a lot of people don't secure their mobiles. They download applications that are not trusted, and that's where a lot of the hackers are now taking advantage of. So you gotta be careful. One of the major things that I say about mobile security, fight the temptation to unlock it or jailbreak it, or the idea that in order to get free software, you unlock it and you jailbreak it. That is a very bad thing from a security perspective. Yes, it saves you a little bit money, but it will end up causing you a lot more in the long run. Social media security is another topic that I will touch on. A lot of us are using social media to have communication, and it's actually valid and it's very important, especially in these days when we're all quarantined. We keep in touch with our loved ones, we keep in touch with our work and so on. However, it's how much you're putting there that could be a risk for you. A traditional attack used to be during social engineering is what they call dumpster diving. Dumpster diving is that hacker go to your trash bins or the trash bucket behind the company to try and steal information by looking at the trash, the documents, getting information. So they used to call it dumpster diving. They used to spend too much time. It is hard. Nowadays, they don't have to do that. We're making it too easy for them because we are putting so much information about ourselves on Facebook, social media, that they don't have to go and do dumpster diving. They can simply just go into your social media and know a lot about you. That information can be used to attack you. So again, be careful when you're doing that. So these are some of the tips that I can share with people. There's a lot more, and we encourage people to do a lot more to know more about the cybersecurity threat. But I also touch on the organizational element. Even as an employee or as a manager, you need to think of an organization perspective. The best practice for it, there's so many things that we're doing, but in my opinion, the fundamental element is that you need to adopt a framework like the Information Security Management System, which is the standard ISO 27001. It helps you to put together the processes, the procedures, the main component that will help you secure your organization. It doesn't have to be just 27001. You could use your local standards like the NISA issued one, or the NCA in Saudi, or business continuity ISO 27001, because now we're talking a lot about resilience. All these best practices need to be implemented, and that's how you get started. You can then go into also verify and assure that what you have put in place, all your technology are working. This is where you start doing vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, ethical hacking type of testing. You can implement the best practice, again, the technologies, like we said, DLP, firewalls, antivirus, all these different technologies. But also very important nowadays, we're building a lot of security operations center, because those technologies, if you don't monitor them on a regular basis and be ready to handle the attacks with them, you will not be ready. We always say nowadays, we don't say when the attack will happen. It's not when you will be hacked. It is it's not if you're going to be hacked, it is when. This is what we're saying nowadays, so that we have to be ready, vigilant, aware. That's why we're doing all these best practices in terms of processes, awareness to the people, as well as technologies. All together will come across, as I mentioned in the beginning, people, processes, and technology will articulate it together, will help or secure your data as a person as well as organization. And I thank you from my time. I hope I'm stayed within the time frame. I'll
Thank you
unshare.
so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Muntasir. That was a very, very insightful and detailed presentation indeed, with a lot of very interesting statistics. And I think now we have a brilliant segue for the second speaker, Mr. Naeem Musa, who is, I would just like to introduce him shortly. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at the Commodities Future Tradings Commission, CFTC, based in the United States. The mission of the CFTC is to promote the integrity, resilience, vibrancy of the U.S. derivatives markets through regulation. And Mr. Naeem Musa is going to be discussing cybersecurity tips for remote working during COVID-19. And I think with this, the floor is all yours, Mr. Naeem.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I hope we can see my screen now.
Absolutely, it looks perfect.
Great, fantastic. So this was a great segue to Muntasir's presentation. Again, in addition to being the Chief Information Security Officer for the Commodity Future Trading Commission, I am an adjunct professor with the American Military University, as well as I am a licensed instructor with the ISC Square teaching CISSP boot camps. So I'm going to discuss a couple of questions that were raised here as part of the working from home or teleworking. The first one, what precautions are needed for people using their home machines to telework and to access the office environment, and what can be done to ensure that connecting devices, including personal computers and phones and all that, how would they harm or interfere with the office network? So first, we all know this is a global phenomenon that we're witnessing. This pandemic is forcing major changes to the way we do business. I mean, most of us, if not all of us, who can work from home or their work can be mobile, are working from home, with the governments, private entities, and everybody. So with that come a lot of change. I mean, one of the first thing as a teleworker, what you need to do is you need to be familiar with your organization's telework policies. We all also know that since this pandemic just happened so rapidly and quickly, a lot of organizations did not yet adapt to it, and there are a lot of work going on now to adopt and change these policies. But it really helps you out to understand the do's and don'ts of your telework policies. If you're not allowed to connect with a cell phone, do not connect with a cell phone. And the reason some of these policies are put there as a management control, not a technical control. It's hard to create a technical control for everything. So sometimes management controls are put in place in the form of a policy to tell you what to do, what not to do. The second tip would be use only devices approved by your organization. I mean, if you are approved to use an organization furnished equipment, that's the only thing you should use in terms of accessing the organization's assets. So stick to that in order to protect the organization and also to protect yourself as an employee. Use VPN when necessary. I believe the use of VPN is not only necessary, it's almost a must. I mean, given the fact that you need to protect that connection and you need to protect the assets and the interaction between your machine and the office, the best way to go about it is by using a virtual private network. That connection or that network is encrypted end to end, so it affords you a lot of protection. One of the big things that we seem to lose sight of is updating our personal equipment. Everybody's busy, like, is my laptop up to date with patches and all that? In most cases, people are paying attention to those. Those are the easy ones. However, I think one of the things we need to ensure also, your infrastructure at home, including your, the service provider, your internet service provider modem or router is up to date. Those are becoming like almost the favorite target for hackers, because those are easy to break into and gain access to your information and to your network at home and your potentially your machine, and then eventually gaining access to sensitive information within your organization. Back to Monty's point, think before you click. That's a must. social engineering in the form of email. Everything we get now, majority, and I'll show a slide, down about the attack vectors and what's becoming like the largest attack vector, which is mostly through email, and it's like in the form of phishing attacks. Continuing tips: guard your devices. I mean, nowadays you're allowed to work from home, and some of these devices have sensitive information. You might be working outside in your patio, or you may end up going potentially outside to a park to work if you are bored. We all cooked at home for 24/7, so some people may end up going somewhere. You want to make sure that your devices are physically protected. Nobody can snatch it. Also, if you are in a public setting, people cannot really snoop and do, what we call shoulder surfing and watch what when you put your username and password, or even be able to glean and see some sensitive information in your screen. So protecting your devices physically is important. Create strong passwords. Obviously, I'm hoping that most organizations are, going away and not using passwords. I mean, that's what we did in our organization, but sometimes the password applications is still prevalent and people are still using them. So you definitely want to.
Excuse me for interrupting. If you can just repeat the last sentence because of some cuts. I apologize for interrupting.
My bad. So we're talking about creating a strong passwords. Most organizations has done away with the use of passwords. Everybody's using multi-factor authentication in the form of a smart card or potentially biometrics. But in some cases, the use of password is still there. You want to ensure that your password is strong. And one thing we caution is using the same password for multiple things. I mean, if you're shopping online, Alibaba, Amazon, and you have an account, don't use the same password or the same username that you use for these services, the one used for your job or for access to sensitive information about your health or bank accounts. Always change your passwords, make sure they're not the same, and make sure they're strong. And strong means they have to be at least 12 characters. They have an upper lowercase and a special character in them, and hard to guess. I mean, you don't want to use something that's related to you, because that's what they usually, the hackers will usually try to attempt to figure out if they can guess your password. And the use of two-factor authentication. The federal government in the United States require everybody to use what's called as a PIV card. It's a smart card that has a certificate on it. So now you have your something you have on something you know. Something you have is your PIV card or the smart card. Something you know is a six-digit password or potentially an 8-digit password. So that's what we use to authenticate through VPN or actually on the network if we are present in the building. Encrypt your email. Email, typically if you send sensitive information, you may have to send correspondence to other organizations that you're working with, and they may have contained some personally identifiable information, what we call PII, or potentially company secrets. You should definitely want to encrypt those emails, and you don't want to send the password with the same email. Encrypt it, send the password in a different email, or maybe pick up the phone and call the recipient and give them the password over the phone. That will definitely give you a little more coverage. Getting your devices is critical. I mean, we are running into some major issue now with everybody working from home. Trying to patch devices over VPN with the bandwidth is becoming a major issue. So we're looking for creative ways to continue to ensure these devices are up to date in terms of the hardware and in terms of the OS. So everything must be up to date. We were talking about the user, now we're talking about advice for organizations. Secure systems that enable remote access. This includes the VPN servers. I mean, those must be hardened. They have to be fully patched, updated, and up to date. This way, hackers cannot really exploit known vulnerabilities associated with some of these systems. Prior to allowing everybody to telework, you want to test remote access solutions in terms of capacity and in terms of going to work for everybody. I recall before our commission went to full telework mode, we took a day and we told everybody stay home and try to connect through VPN, and everybody connected successfully. There was no issues, capacity was no problem. After that, the commission decided we are going to now to ask everybody to work from home for the unforeseen future. One of the things that we talked about here, like I think with Monty, when we talk about the ability to ensure continuity of operations. Now we have a different operating mode. Everybody's working from home. You want to ensure that your continuity of operations reflects that change, those changes. I mean, whether it's call trees or how to have access to certain licensing number if you need to call a specific vendor and there's an outage of some sort, and you may need to have even some professional services. A lot of these contracts and licensing numbers and the things that we're able to talk about might be in the office. You want to ensure that those are updated, those are available, and the same thing with the call tree. If you need to contact different people now, not everybody has a cell phone, and you may need to have their home number included in this continuity of operations. Increase awareness of IT support mechanisms, employees who work remotely. Obviously, most of us, like back in the office, if I want to call the help desk, I have a button I push, and it's programmed to dial the number. So ensure that some of these mechanisms, how to contact the help desk, how to report incidents, is still, as a remote user, you still have the ability, and you have the numbers you need to call. Whether you need to call the security team or the help desk for an issue, you have those numbers. Otherwise, if you have an outage and you cannot access the network to look up these numbers, all of a sudden you have no information how to contact anyone, and that could cause you an issue. Updated incident response plans to consider workforce changes in a distributed environment. I mean, with all of us working from home, including the security team, so now, responding to an incident may not be as easy as it was before. It would be easy to assemble the incident response team in the office and get everybody on board. And when everybody's teleworking, have different telework hours, it may become an issue. So you really want to update this incident response plans and ensure like they reflect the new reality. I'll mention like what we characterize as two cybersecurity risks in terms of what's happening in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. A higher profile event, which is really increased phishing attacks related to the pandemic. I mean, this is now becoming a major attack vector for the bad guys. Why? Because everybody's glued to the TV and to the news outlets looking for information about the pandemic. Okay, how many new cases do we have today? How many deaths? What's the total number? Did we surpass 1 million? I mean, in the US, like we're glued because we have these different applications or these different simulations that they predictions that they came up with, that certain amount of numbers or infections going to take place by a week or by month. So everybody's interested to see if those models are accurate or not. So any source of information, someone may entice you to click on that link and fall as a victim. So with that, user awareness, like Montasser mentioned, becomes more critical. Taking some steps to alert the users, like one of the things we've done, any external email that's coming to the commission now, it's labeled as caution, this is an external email. So people can, in the midst of their busy day, they know this email is not coming from the commission, it's coming from outside, so they have to pay a little more attention to it. The second event, or the second thing that really brings more risk to the environment is the increased telework or the use of VPN. Additionally, use of video teleconferencing. I mean, before, I think we had maybe 50 to 100 WebEx meetings a month. I think we're having maybe 100 to 200 WebEx meetings a day now. So there's a massive increase of using video conferencing solutions like Zoom and WebEx and Teams. So with that, there comes a lot of security risks. Bandwidth utilization, I spoke about when we tried to patch laptops. We found it really hard to do this over the wire. So now we're trying to get creative by doing like split tunneling, by whitelisting the VPN to ensure that if you're working from home, you're still going to get the patches, but through different mechanisms, and you're not going to be taxing the network. But that was an issue. So we did have to upgrade our circuits and our traffic, the utilization of the bandwidth. Again, the monitoring and patching, security team has added responsibility to look for abnormal activities. The network operations team needs to continue to patch the servers, the desktops, the network gear, and ensure everything is up to date to prevent exploits of known vulnerabilities. This is an eye chart. I don't know if you all can see, but I think I want to absolutely right. Phishing continues to be in 2019.
Excuse me for interrupting. If you can just repeat the last sentence. I'm so sorry, but something cut as well. So apologies for interrupting again.
No worries. I wanted to show this chart just to confirm a point that if we look at from 2012 up to 2019, so are becoming more known. Phishing now is almost the lost act, and we expect that to continue. Am I coming clear?
It's a bit. If you can just now you're very clear. So if you can just
Okay.
repeat the last section.
The last sentence. Okay. It's probably because everybody is working from home. We have the network is strained. What I'm trying to say is the known attack vectors in the last few years are we can tell now, which is becoming really number one attack vector because of that. That's really the point here. This is from the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center. In the U.S., we have multiple information analysis centers. We have this happened to this was created after the Russian interference with our elections. So they share information about different types of breaches and threat attacks. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Naeem, and apologies for interrupting you. I think that indeed this was a very, very interesting presentation, and it fit very nicely. The flow is there from Mr. Muntasir Budair's presentation. And I think now we have Mr. Andrew Staniforth from the UK, and the topic of his presentation is Organizational Resilience, Combating COVID-19 Cyber Threats. And I think with that, you can take the floor, Mr. Staniforth.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I am Andrew Staniforth, Director of SAHIR Europe and Non-Resident Fellow in Counter-Terrorism at Trent. So thank you for joining this e-discussion about cybersecurity and COVID-19, both of which present a clear and present danger to the security and economic well-being of countries across the world. And hopefully in my presentation, I'll be able to give you a more of a European perspective so far. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Trent for their kind invitation to present and join this e-discussion at a time when it has never been more important to share knowledge and expertise in relation to security matters, and security matters that are really impacted upon all of us in a number of ways. So the title of my presentation is Organizational Resilience, Combating COVID-19 Cyber Threats, which really continues with the first and second presentations that you've heard so far. The purpose of my presentation is to raise awareness of positive cybersecurity postures that are based on preparedness and readiness for an organization of how to prevent, detect, respond and recover from all manner of cyber-related attacks. And I really just want to start by saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has served to expose pre-existing cybersecurity vulnerabilities, but it's also created some new challenges. So my presentation will be in three parts, a few minutes each. I'll first look at the cyber threat landscape as it was prior to the COVID-19 crisis. I'll then move on to having a look at some of the specifics of the challenges of COVID-19 for cybersecurity, and then finish off with a small session on cybersecurity, which really looks at how do we manage all of this from an organizational perspective. So for those of you that are listening that have responsibility for an organization or a department or a team, how can you employ some of the important issues that have been previously raised. So let's just have a look at the cyber threat landscape as it was at the beginning of 2020. And I'd encourage everybody to read the official annual cybercrime report by Cybercrime Ventures for this year, which stated that cybercrime is the greatest global threat to every company and public sector organization. And it predicted that cybercrime will cost the world in excess of $6 trillion annually by next year. And I think it's worth me just mentioning that figure again, because it is absolutely huge, in excess of $6 trillion. Now, for organizations, the costs associated with cybercrime are vast. Cybercrime costs include damage and destruction of data, stolen money, lost productivity, theft of intellectual property, theft of personal and financial data, as well as post-attack disruption to the normal course of business, reputational harm, and much, much more. Now, we know that the internet has changed, and it continues to change, the very nature of crime. And this is important because we've entered the era of high-volume, low-impact crimes, where criminals are no longer committing a single crime to steal $1 million, but instead are committing 1 million cyber crimes of $1 each, being largely undetected by their victims and by law enforcement. Now, this shift in criminal behavior represents an entirely new challenge for law enforcement, not just to keep people safe online, but also looking at those cyber attacks as they become increasingly sophisticated. Now, one major challenge in combating cybercrime appears that attackers are launching a greater number of less obvious attacks. One of the trends that we've seen so far is a larger number of smaller value crimes, which are going below the radar and therefore avoid detection by law enforcement. A growing concern has been the development of ransomware cyber threat landscape last year, which has been touched on already, but it remains hostile and is becoming increasingly aggressive. So with hackers continuing to see value in using both targeted and what we call spray and pray approaches to attack enterprises, public bodies, and governments. The current ransomware threat landscape indicates that attackers are no longer going after only large organizations. Today's attackers are more about the size of your cyber vulnerability, not your market value as an organization. So this has been an issue of high concern for institutions such as the FBI in the United States, who have issued warnings that ransomware presents an urgent and high-impact threat to businesses and public sector organizations, and as a development of the cyber threat landscape, which we should now all be taking note, and it should all be on our radars. So, effective cybersecurity requires much more than just technology tools. For those organizations that have a large number of employees, they are much more exposed to the security vulnerabilities caused by security mistakes, for example, inadequate training of colleagues, and criminal activity from within your own organization. So despite the understandable focus placed upon criminal cyber attacks targeting organizations from the outside, employees remain the largest security risk in any organization. A primary group is careless users, and this has been touched on before by the two previous speakers. So those who accidentally reveal information that helps others carry out attacks, much of which is due to lack of awareness about how to minimize cyber risk. And the problem is amplified by today's bring your own device culture, where staff have their smartphones at work, which is amplified even more today as we're all working from home with our private smartphones that may not be regulated or sanctioned by the organization that we work for. Now, to prevent insider breaches, especially accidental ones, internal users must be vigilant. And to be vigilant, they need to know how to behave. Now, unfortunately, the current Covid-19 cybersecurity crisis has preyed upon the insecurity and vulnerability of citizens and employees, especially as we adjust to what is now the new normal. So moving on to specific COVID-related cyber threats, unfortunately, it was entirely inevitable that cyber criminals would take advantage of the current public health emergency, but their actions have even surprised the most hardened cybersecurity professionals. Cyber criminals are capitalizing on the growing fears over the COVID-19 pandemic to such an extent that a spike in malicious online activity has been recorded. One such campaign has been exposed, a malware-laced message carrying false advice and a hidden threat, so widely emailed that it quickly reached a staggering 10% of the organizations in Italy, the country that it targeted first. Now, we have watched criminal actors target financial institutions in Asia and then move across Europe and into the United States as they develop their tactics and capabilities. And the cyber threat could be seen following the path of the coronavirus, sending people phishing emails to prey on people's fears to open the attachments. The exploitation of cyber criminals of major news events to lure and implant malware that allows remote access to a victim's computer network is really nothing new. But as communities themselves across the world attempt to come together to help defeat the virus, and especially those quarantined within isolated areas, the actions of a small group of organised cyber criminals is causing significant harm, and it's negatively impacting upon government measures to strengthen societal resilience to contain and delay the spread of the virus. In the UK, for an example, Action Fraud, which is the UK's National Reporting Centre for Fraud and Financially Motivated Crime, revealed that they've received multiple reports about coronavirus-themed phishing emails attempting to trick people into opening malicious attachments or revealing sensitive personal and financial information. Now, Action Fraud also report that in February, which is very early in the pandemic crisis, if you can remember that long ago, the National Fraud Intelligence Bureau identified 21 reports of fraud where coronavirus was mentioned, with victim losses several months ago totaling over £800,000. Now, of those 21 reports, 10 were made by victims that attempted to purchase protective face masks from fraudulent sellers. One victim reported losing over £15,000 when they purchased face masks that were never delivered. So one common tactic used by fraudsters, as we've already heard, is to contact potential victims over email purporting to be from research organisations affiliated with large international organisations such as the Centres for Disease Control and Prevention, or the World Health Organization. They claim to be able to provide the recipient with a list of coronavirus infected people in their area. In order to access this information, the victim needs to click on a link which leads to a malicious website or is asked to make a payment in Bitcoin. So to reinforce some of the messages from my previous co-speakers is to think before you click. Because at a time when members of the public, just think about your family members, particularly your elderly family members, that are increasingly anxious about the impact of coronavirus in their locality, in their community. You know, they are currently receiving legitimate emails from their doctors, from their medical practices. It is easy to see how cyber criminals are exploiting those vulnerabilities. But we must remember that it's not just individuals who are COVID-19 related cyber attacks. Businesses are also under siege from online actors with hostile intentions. The European Central Bank has even written to financial institutions warning of the critical need to plan for the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, which could leave firms more at risk due to mass absences. Now, banks are being urged to prepare for an increase in cyber attacks as criminals seek to take advantage of the potential chaos currently caused by the pandemic. So it's not just large financial institutions which are at risk of cyber threats. Small local businesses could also be hit the hardest, which is why the creation and implementation of a strategic approach to all cyber threats is required. Now, moving on to the final part of my presentation, I think it's important to say that, in reality, the COVID-19 crisis has served to amplify and expose pre-existing cyber security vulnerabilities. Now, cyber attacks can cause tremendous harm. They can ruin businesses that have been painstakingly built over many years. Family businesses can be destroyed, and along with it, a lifetime's work. The elderly in our communities can also be directly affected, with life savings and pensions looted by anonymous criminals. This is real, and this is important. And we must never forget that cybercrime is not a victimless crime. It damages citizens, communities, and commerce. And I hope, actually, that the seriousness of some of the COVID-19 related cybercrimes that prey on people's fears and anxiety leave much stronger deterrents for perpetrators. But for now, we must still focus upon what we can do to protect ourselves and to prevent attacks. And that is to develop a strategic approach to cyber threats. But we must remember that responding to those cyber threats is really ineffective without fully understanding or acquiring the knowledge of those threats, and actually getting qualified professional people, deploying appropriate technical tools, and integrating those people and tools into a coherent and comprehensive strategy that looks at prevention, detection, testing, and review. And that needs to be part of a coherent strategy, a coherent approach, which I believe best is served by our approach of organizational resilience. So what do I mean by organizational resilience? Well, it's a strategic objective intended for the organization to survive and prosper. Resilience is about being more adaptive, more competitive, and more robust than other organizations. Organizational resilience is a very different approach. You're accepting that actually cyber attacks may very well occur. So you dedicate your time to preparing the responses, which means that actually you can prepare better, anticipate those threats that will inevitably come, but it means that you're far better prepared to cope and manage those issues and incidents as and when they occur. So just to summarize and really conclude my presentation, I'd like to start by saying that total security from cyber attacks, it does not exist. And if you're in conversations with any organizations or any cybersecurity professionals that say they can offer total security from cyber attack, I suggest you move on and look elsewhere, because it isn't. Cyber criminals are out there now looking for the next attack, motivated by the finances that it can bring them, or increasingly, it can bring their organized crime group who they're employed to work for. Now, in light of that conclusion, we need to go back to basics in terms of fostering ongoing cybersecurity awareness, which remains one of the simplest yet most effective ways to help keep people and organizations safe, particularly when you're working from home. As the cyber threat landscape is ever changing, it remains vital to ensure all employees within an organization are continuously aware and informed of their company's cybersecurity postures. So just to reinforce the messages from the previous two speakers, understand your own organization's policies, practices, procedures, and more importantly, if you feel that they are not strong enough or robust enough, or you're comfortable with them, raise it through your line management to strengthen your cybersecurity postures whilst you're working from home. Because those organizations who proactively embed cybersecurity measures into their operating cultures will prove to be those who survive future cyber attacks and go on to thrive. They will recover quickly and become more resilient to all manner of cyber threats. So a cybersecurity strategy must be integrated with all of the physical and operational security plans in order for it to be effective and provide a greater resilience to cyber threats. So that concludes my presentation. Just to thank you all for listening, and I hope that you found it useful, and I look forward to responding to some of your questions in due course. But thank you very much for your time, and thanks again for Trends for your kind invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Staniforth. Your presentation was very interesting and very detailed, especially the points about the cybersecurity strategy and organizational resilience. And we had many questions actually coming in on yours and the two previous presentations. And I think the last but not the least is Dr. Ernesto Damiani, who is now with us here, who is going to be discussing the COVID crisis, lessons learned in cybersecurity PSYOP. And he is a professor and a director at Khalifa University Center for Cyber Physical Systems, C2PS, based in the United Arab Emirates. C2PS focuses on artificial intelligence, data science, next generation networks, and cybersecurity, among other things. And I think with that, I will yield the floor to Dr. Ernesto.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So it's very difficult to conclude such a set of excellent presentations. I also enjoyed listening to the others. So I will try to quickly give concrete examples of stuff that has already been introduced, and I think it will be useful and interesting to go deeper in some real case studies that we have been looking at. But before those case studies, I would like to add an additional remark to what has already been said by my colleagues. So, just a second, because for some reason, okay. So the remark is more of a social engineering and psychologically linked to the psychology. When you move from the company to home, especially under the type of stress that anyway pandemics has created, with under the the bombing of news that comes to us through the media and stuff like that. Well, even the experts are no longer entirely the experts that they are at work. Working from home is a shift in psychological attitude with respect to the procedures, with respect to the processes, and with respect to the configurations. So it's not just the technology, it is also that people are more gullible from home. And this is not the fault of anyone. It's just a matter of psychological setting, in a sense. So I like to remind people of the Maslow hierarchy, which is something that is used in PsyOp. And this is why I use the PsyOp word as the title of my presentation. Well, the social engineers know perfectly well that what you can be persuaded to do or what you will neglect of doing will depend on the current situation, or how you depict yourself in that moment. And at home, maybe with your family around you, in a different situation, you will have a different perception of yourself. So the problem is that you become a little bit more gullible from the point of view of the hacking, from the point of view of the social engineering type of attacks especially. So without going into the details, what the example that I want to bring is an example that was mentioned by some of the colleagues beforehand. This is the famous mail from the World Health Organization, which is actually a fraud. It is one of those phishing attacks. And the problem is not in the attack itself. Well, basically, if you click on this URL, you would go to a web page, which is a framed web page. And of course, most of the frames are legitimate reproduction of pages from the World Health Organization itself. But one of the frames is actually, well, the place where the attacker wants you to give him the email and the username and the password of the email account of the victim. But the problem is not the attack itself. It's quite a standard one. But the fact that it uses the WHO label has brought to a redemption that is exceptional. People working from home, even people who are experts, would tend to fall for this. Some of them even went chatting with the hacker on the other side. So this is something that is strange in the redemption rate, not that much in the attack, and shows that the same person taken in different situations may have a different behavior, and the work from home is a dangerous situation to be. For me, for you, as for the other people. So we like to think we are experts. Well, never say it too loud, okay? So, and this is what I call a deadly mix with working from home. The self-perception of people changes, and so they become more gullible to attacks. Some attacks that wouldn't work at home, at the office, will work at home. And these not just the social engineering ones. We have a whole attack surface that was, of course, recalled by my colleagues before, that it changes due to the fact that at home, you are doing the same procedures, but you are using different hardware, you are using different software to do them. In many cases, the companies will not even let you do it from your own laptop, the laptop that you own, where the lack of control over the configuration is complete. So I just wanted to remind you of an attack, which is a very simple one. It was a DNS substitution attack, in which basically the configuration of the DNS of the home router was attacked in order to put in the address of a different DNS server. And this DNS server would serve everything fine, but for a few domains. And those few domains would be mapped into IP addresses which were owned by the hacker, and where basically you would do other type of attacks. Basically, they would transfer a content stealer from those IP addresses. Now you see the OSCI. OSCI is a known info stealer. Was transferred from those pages. The user doesn't notice anything because the hacker-owned remote site will also take you to the legitimate one that you're visiting. So you don't notice, but by passing to, you are getting an info stealer. It's a common trick, something that we prevent easily when we are in the office, because the DNS in the office, well, DNS security is a specialization these days, but from home, the configuration of the home router, which DNS will the user be actually using when working, is something that is outside the perimeter of our security defenses, because the guy is working from home. And even if he is an expert, he may not really care or pay attention to that problem. So this is the attack details. Basically, again, while going to the site that you are supposed to visit, you are getting this type of pop-up, and this type of pop-up will tell you, do something here to get the latest information. If you click on that, you get the info stealer that I was mentioning. Same thing, another quick example is about VPNs. VPNs are safe, yes. VPN keep us safe, yes. On the other hand, for example, there is this VPN Sank4. It basically, when someone connected using an obsolete version of the client, it would take you to an update site inside the organization. So the update site is not a problem per se when you are in the when you're visiting the thing, but coupled with the DNS attack that I was mentioning before, it was shown in the lab that it can take you to a site where you do not download the new version of the VPN client. You are downloading an executable, which will be potentially malicious. So it is something that will never happen if you are basically calling from the laptop that your organization gives you, but something that may happen if you, and actually it was shown in the lab, that is a vulnerability in only one version of that particular VPN software, but shows you that misconfiguration on the user machine due to the fact that the machine is outside the control of the company IT may be a source of problems. Same thing, many companies would say, well, if you cannot do something from home, keep your remote desktop control open. Our IT people from home as well will help you. This is a capital mistake. The recent statistics show that the attacks, brute force attack to RDP software, which is the remote desktop protocol that is used by the IT people to assist us when we need something. They connect to our desktop, take control of our computer. So the statistics have shown that during the COVID pandemics, the brute force attack trying to brute force the passwords of the RDP are basically skyrocketing. And again, it's nothing serious, nothing really serious, but shows that the bad guys know that these are dangerous times, and they're trying to make our life more interesting during these dangerous times. So very quickly, I don't want to go into too many details. My colleagues have valiantly discussed all this. This is also true. This is just a nice slide that also show the waves of the phishing that have been sort of pouring into organizations because the spammers know that people are working from home. And so they will be more vulnerable to emails about the pandemics, protect your family, click here, we will give you right information. And so these are the waves, and these waves of attack that have been current in, you see, until the end of, these statistics are until the end of March. Show you the waves of this type of attack that was already described. Now, I wanted to give you a case study. So what can we do? Very quickly, I will try to introduce you to a practical case study that shows that when you do the transition working from the office to working from home, some critical processes may become security impaired, may become vulnerable to attacks. This is a cancer registry. A cancer registry is basically a specific data set which contains all the cases of cancer that are collected from the hospitals for epidemiological reasons. And this is an Italian case study, but there is a European directive that tells you that these type of registries are mandatory for all the member countries in the EU. So each region has its own registry with all the cases of cancer. This is used for epidemiological studies, for planning the health policy. I don't want to go into the detail. How does this work? Well, basically, this is the list of the actions that people, which are the personnel of the registry, where they receive the information from the hospitals, and basically they update the database, which is used for the epidemiological studies. Now, this is something that you see, you are inside the perimeter of a very well-defended organization doing this, because the data that come in from the hospitals are very sensitive, and the data of the database are even more sensitive. So basically, normally, well, it's of course a problem for security experts to make this citadel difficult to break in, but well, this is part of our job. But now, these are the people who work. Are the physicians and the director, and all those are doctors. Apart from the computer staff, from the IT staff, all the personnel are doctors. The one that receive the emails from the hospitals is not an email, but the connections from the hospitals with the data, the ones that update the database, all of them are doctors. So are not IT experts, and they may be vulnerable to phishing attacks while they're working from home, much more than because they are not, basically maybe they are using their personal Gmail from home, and they can be targeted there where the capability of spam filtering is lower. So we have the problem that moving these people working from home is basically making this type of scenario very dangerous. So what did we do? So this is the system at a glance. Basically, this is what happens when you work actually in normal conditions. But when you work from home, you basically are actually accessing via VPN the architectures that you are seeing in this slide. What did we do in order to improve the resilience? And this is a very nice word that I heard in the previous presentation. We wanted to improve the resilience of this organization. What we tried this way. We didn't train the IT people, we trained the people who actually are working from home. And we trained them with our own version of a cyber range. It's not the cyber range for experts that you normally see. Cyber range where people will try to defend themselves from attacks. So blue team, red team type of situations. We are trying to do a different story. We are trying to train people to behave safely. It's like stay safe, stay home, stay safe, extended to the IT. And so we are trying to train them in basically how they should behave when they carry out sensitive processes of their organization while working from home. So basically we duplicated the work environment, simulating exactly the workplace that the person would have in the office. And basically we tested them. We sent them the phishing emails. We tried to do all the things that could push them to do some fatal mistake. And this is a sort of a serious gaming type of approach. I'm not saying that this is a recipe that everybody can adopt, but this proved useful in our case. So don't consider the cyber range as something for specialists. Training the people to the correct practices that do while working from home can improve the security of the overall system. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but really can be useful. Okay, so these are a few resources that I've collected, but there are many others that you have heard. This is basically what my presentation, and I hope that, well, we all stay safe, both from the cyber point of view and from the health point of view in these pandemics.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ernesto Damiani. And I think this presentation sums up really well all of the four speakers. Thank you so much again. And I think we touched upon some key topics such as digital transformation, tightening regulation, think before you click, or including even the Maslow hierarchy in the interpretation, cybersecurity strategy improvement, organizational resilience, but also the phrase that you use yourself, Dr. Ernesto, stay home, stay safe, extended to IT. So I think if you can stop the screen sharing, Dr. Ernesto, so that we can proceed to the Q&A, because we have a lot of very, very interesting questions that are incoming. Thank you so much. So on that note, I think we can proceed to the Q&A. Actually, I would like to start with the first question about regulation, because I think all of the four speakers touched upon tightening regulation, especially now amidst the COVID-19 crisis. So I wanted to ask you, where do we draw the line? How much regulation is too much regulation in the field? Whoever wants to take the floor first. I think, Mr. Muntasser, you can start, given that you were the first one to mention it.
Okay. Well, thank you again for giving us the chance to share and discuss these important points. Regulation, yes, I think regulation is necessary. It is important, as I mentioned earlier, in order for it to drive the people in charge to start thinking with cybersecurity and to deal with cybersecurity. However, going too much or too far with it can become give the opposite effect, which is too much that we want just a checkbox, or we want to just comply with the regulations, and we don't care about doing the right thing. So yes, regulations, in my opinion, are very important. We need to have them because they do push people to do the right things. They do encourage decision makers to pay attention, but obviously on the other side of it, if you do it too much and you're emphasizing it too much, one disadvantage to it is that you become like a checkbox and you just want to check this box, yeah, I am complying, without actually doing the right thing. So it is balancing the requirements of the regulation versus doing what is right is an important element to keep in mind. But I do support having regulations, because without it, from my experience, when I looked at it from a US perspective, Europe and the Middle East, until regulations were put in place, it does not become center stage. And that's why I like it and I push for it.
Thank you so much. I think Dr. Naeem Musa, I think would you want to jump in as well? And if I can just ask before that, Dr. Ernesto Damiani, if it's possible for you to open up your video, if it's possible. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Naeem.
Yeah, I totally agree with Muntasser. It's all about what I call sound regulations. We just don't want to have regulations for the sake of having regulations. In the US, from a cybersecurity perspective, for the federal side, we are driven by what's known as the Federal Information Security Management Act, or FISMA. Every government agency is required to comply with this act. If we look back, since I've been in the industry and working for government for the last 15 years, this regulation really took a new look, a new feel. It's no longer about checking the box, like Muntasser said. It's more about the security posture and doing what makes sense. The regulations has to be flexible, and there's no size fits all. But even us as a government organization, we are actually a regulatory agency. So we regulate Wall Street, and we regulate a few trillion of dollars worth of financial transactions. So one of the things we also, in order to regulate the market in terms of keeping the investors safe, is we requested what's known as safeguards in terms of all the major banks or major institutions. They have to comply with some of these regulations as well, but we give them a lot of flexibility. Some of these regulations are meant for them to really take the positive steps. And it wasn't really focused at following a specific standard or guideline as much as is the outcome. Are you secure in your environment? Do you do backup and recovery? Do you have a penetration testing program? All these. So I mean, I'm in support of regulations as long as they are sound regulations. They make sense. Too much regulation can be bad. Too little regulation can be bad. So the answer is somewhere in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any of the other speakers would like to add anything? If not, I have another question, which is about the best practices, actually. I think Dr. Andrew Stenforth was talking about best practices. You touched upon best practices for the UK in particular. And I think it would be interesting perhaps to see what best practices can be replicated across countries in terms of cybersecurity crisis management. For example, what steps can feasibly be taken to improve transparency in cyberspace across countries and actually manage conflicts successfully? So I think that would be the question.
Okay, well, it is a real challenge for governments to work much closer together. But if there's anything positive to come from this current crisis, it will hopefully be that governments of all nations will work much closer together, because one thing is for certain: no one single government or no one single government agency can solve this problem on their own. It will only be achieved through governments working together across what I call bridging the gap. And the gap is government, academia, and the private sector, the gap, all working together to a common goal. And actually, there has never been a time when we're all united in a common goal of defeating COVID-19. If we can bring that energy and enthusiasm as well to tackling just some of the cybersecurity issues, then I think the world will be a much better place, because the future is looking like we are going to be more networked than ever before, working more remotely than ever before. So we need to make sure that what we do online is safe, what our children do online is safe, and our working practices are safe. So there will continue to be enormous challenges, but those challenges are far better overcome when they're shared.
Thank you so much. And I think that actually leads me to the third question, which is about elongated or long-term working from home. I think some companies now, like Microsoft, have allowed entire sectors of their company to actually work remotely until 2021. And some schools, such as Cambridge, for example, have announced online classes for the whole of next academic year. So how do we actually now deal with this protracted, elongated situation of remote work, potentially across a lot of industries as well? Whoever wants to, do you want to, Dr. Ernesto, please?
Yeah, I'm the one who haven't tried to answer anything until now, so we had some. Well, frankly speaking, I would like to remind the audience and my colleagues of the only time we tried, we had a similar experience, which was the bring your own device, the BYOD crisis, in which in a long situation, of course it was different because it was, but basically we had, that was the first time in which the perimeter of the companies, well, they were first of becoming blurred, and people were allowed to bring in devices over which configuration the company had no control. It took a long while until we developed a way to handle that situation, to allow, and even now, of course, bring your own device is still, well, not that easy to handle in many organizations, right? Because when the user comes in with the device brought in from home, he may already have a sleeper inside that device. Now the perimeter is falling in a different way. The mass work from home is another type of, let's say, holes in the perimeters of the organization, and is here to stay. So frankly speaking, I have no doubt that it's here to stay, not only because the virus may come back, we all know that story, but also generally speaking, I think that the virtualization of the organizations, including the hospitals, we have seen now that a lot of the healthcare operations are taking place at the home, in the home of the patients. And this, well, includes the type of processes that are handled through the network. So this is here to stay. We need to find a way to basically adopt defense lines that are in depth rather than at the perimeter. With the bring your own device, we sort of partly managed to handle that. It's not just technology, it's regulation and it's awareness, in my opinion. Technology alone cannot do it. We need regulations, we need awareness, and we need the technology patterns of defense in depth, which is, I mean, the perimeter is no longer there. Well, when I started working in security, it was all perimeter defense. Where is the perimeter these days? So I think that we need to go in the direction of this three-pronged approach: regulations, technology, and awareness, especially awareness. Even the younger generation should learn how to behave in the cyber world at school. Sorry, I'm taking it a little bit too far, but this is an important part.
Actually, that ties very nicely into another question that I had, which is about how do we raise awareness among different groups of people now with all of these crises that might last for a very long time? For example, youth or marginalized communities, or even, for example, across specific regions like the Global South. So how do we do that where security risks are vast and the protection network isn't as developed as in some other countries? So how would we navigate about raising awareness in such situations?
I think I can just touch on that shortly. I mean, my experience in public sector, private industry, and in higher education sectors tells me that if you want to achieve anything and get anything done across your organization, you have to embed it into the very culture of your organization. So embedding cybersecurity awareness into your organization to build what I call this organizational resilience approach is everybody having a role and a responsibility of what is to be a modern working professional person. And a part of that is your cyber security stance. And actually within an organization, it starts from your point of entry into that organization. So human resources personnel departments, making sure that actually within everybody's role profile, there are issues on there that touch on cyber-related skills and resilience for people, that everybody has that role and responsibility, whatever role you are within the organization. Mm-hmm. Making sure that maybe in an interview that people are asked questions about cyber-related issues becoming more prevalent, and making sure that those cyber security skills are tested, examined and reviewed. And if you have communications departments within organizations or security departments within organizations, then they become responsible for that organizational approach, making sure that colleagues are updated, aware, educated, trained about the latest threats. So it's linking into your government, your local government, and what they're saying about the threats. And it's following lots of important, valuable and accessible and authoritative information online from many cybersecurity related companies about new threats that are emerging. So it's being alive to those new threats and making sure that your organization is taking it seriously and spreading the word about those issues as soon as possible.
I can add a little bit more to what Andrew said. I couldn't agree more with the fact that we need to embed it within the culture of the organization and even take it to the next level, to the culture of the country. And in my opinion, we can look at it positively with regard to security awareness to take advantage of the COVID challenge that we had. Is actually, it is already changing the culture, in my opinion. I'll take myself as an example. I deliver a lot of courses and I like to do it in person. Well, I'm already transforming myself and I'm actually doing this for the first time. I got the opportunities a lot before and I kind of refused it. I kind of resisted it, and I'm an IT person, right? So I take myself, I am being transformed to do things digitally. We as professionals and people on decision making needs to take advantage of this changing mindset in people like myself or others, and try to do the awareness, also take advantage of this, so to do it online and all these different new channels that are now available to utilize them. That's, in my opinion, is a success factor. Again, embedding it in the culture, as Andrew said, 100%, that is the mechanism, that is the best practice. I've been working on awareness programs all over the countries, and in my opinion, if you're somehow able to change the mindset of people to start wanting to be secure, you are on the right track. And again, utilize all elements. There is a scientific element to building a security program, but in my opinion, you've got to put art into it. I always say it's not science, it is art. And this is where, in my opinion, don't let the techies like me or like us be the one who are driving the awareness only. Encourage the marketing people, encourage your even HR. All of these people can actually embed cultural element to your security awareness program that will make it successful. That is a success factor that I've seen. I used it a lot in the Middle East, transformed it, and it does transform from one country to the other because we're all humans. We're all people. We need to deal with that mindset and culture. And once you've done it, I think we will be succeeding. Or if not succeeding, as Andrew said, there'll never be 100% security or zero risk. We just need to try. That's our job. That's how I see it.
Just to add one quick point, it has to be supported from the top. Senior management at the highest level has to support this, and they have to be part of it. And the users and the staff need to be aware that the senior management is involved and it's important for them. The other thing that I want to say is like it has to be continuous awareness. Not most organizations, they will do that 1 hour a year. You're required to take that one, and no, it has to be continuous. Tips, to Muntasir's point, involving others than the techies in this will actually give it that what it's missing, which is to make it more lively, more entertaining, more relevant to the users. We do more than 12 phishing campaigns a year, like almost a monthly, and we share the results with the directors and with the staff. So we do not make it punitive, but we do, if you click more than one time, we have to talk to you. We need to understand why, what's going on, and we need to bring it to your attention. I think once the director or the chief information security officer is talking to that individual, they start paying more attention. So it's definitely support from the top, making it continuous. I think those two, in addition to what my colleagues have said, will definitely get you better results.
Thank you so much. And I think we have very briefly time for one last question, which concerns cyber threat landscape and kind of long-term trends after COVID-19, involving potentially some sort of a bulletproof international regulatory system mentioned by one of the speakers, or at least some sort of a potential global consensus. So how does that landscape look like, very briefly, if all four speakers could speak to that before we conclude the session?
Okay, just quickly from me, I think it's really a case of what will happen after COVID-19. There will always be another crisis. There will always be new disruptive technology coming along the line. And a key message really from my presentation was that there are very innovative cyber criminals out there developing highly sophisticated attacks that are looking for the next opportunity, and they will seize that opportunity, whatever that might be. It just happens to be a global pandemic crisis at the minute, but they will have no shame. They will have no shame whatsoever to use the next crisis to prey upon people's vulnerabilities.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Muntasir, would you like to? Thank you so much.
I can add to this. The fact that you want to make sure that people are doing what I would call the basic security, regardless of what happens. In my opinion, there's still the basics are missing in a lot of places. So we try to go with the new threats, which we should keep up with the new threats and be able to adapt and be resilient. All of that is fact. But what I also want to stress, regardless of what way we're going, is to implement the basics. The basics are and fundamentals are what everybody's agreeing on. That's where the best practices are on. Implement those, and regardless what the new trends will be, you'll be able to adapt to them because you have the foundational element that's going to support you. So my opinion, stick still to the basics, but keep an eye on what is going on and adapt. Have the ability to adapt and be flexible and make sure that you have a resilience. That's the way that I advise organizations. A lot of people, in my opinion, lately, they look at the latest technologies, the latest mechanism, the latest threats, but they have also the basics wide open and vulnerable. So go back to the basics. That's my final advice, as usual.
Thank you. I think, Dr. Ernesto, would you like to jump in as well?
Yeah. Well, I agree with everything that was said before. I just add one specific point. I've done so many threat landscape studies for ENISA, for the International agencies. I would like to highlight that there is a transition. The transition that's going on is from, let's say, the traditional software systems to the data-driven and the AI-driven software systems. This is a change that is basically changing also the value proposition of many attacks, which are no longer the attacks of the old times. Those are attacks that do exfiltration in a systematic way, that target value in data in a systematic way, that have the infiltration moment and the exploitation moment, which are, well, with a considerable delay. So we are seeing more and more this type of dynamics in the attacks. And I don't think it will stop here. The more we go into a data-driven society, the more we will have the attackers as parasites. A little bit more, they're not just predators, they're also parasites. So
Thank you.
to fighting the parasites is becoming very important for organizations. It's even more important, or as important as fighting the predator that will try to attack you visibly. Here you have this type of infiltration that can be tricky. So I think we are going into a direction in which security is a way of life of the organization. It's not so. What my colleagues already mentioned, I would like to underline it twice. But this is also due to the fact that the value proposition of the attacker is changing. He wants to live with you and basically be able to extract value in the long term, not only in the short term.
Thank you so much. These are all valid points. And I think, Mr. Naeem Musa, would you like to add a conclusion remark before we proceed to the next? Thank you so much.
Yes, one quick point. I think technology has advanced at a scary pace. However, the laws did not keep up with the technology advances. In some countries, I think we're still dealing with common laws from the 1800s. I think given the fact cities are becoming smart, the reliance on the digital technology is more prevalent than ever. The laws has to keep up with those changes in order to make it harder for the bad guys to conduct business. I think the laws has not kept pace with the technology, and that needs to be changing.
Thank you so much. And I would like to thank all four of the speakers and say that tonight's discussion has been very, very fruitful and gave a lot of very interesting points. And I think with that, I would like to give closing remarks to Mr. Ahmed Al-Astad, who is the scientific advisor at Trends.
Thank you, Dr. Amina. Distinguished scholar, expert, and speakers as Strategic Dialogue Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, dear viewers and listeners of the forum, distinguished members of the events and the technical team, dear colleague, the team of the Trends Research and Advisory Center, it's given me a great pleasure to express my sincere thanks and gratitude to all researchers and experts who participated in the series of symposium, lectures, and discussions organized by Trends Research and Advisory Center as part of its Strategic Dialogue Forum. I thank you for your great efforts and for making our forum a real success. We have covered a lot of ground since the first lecture on oil market in post-pandemic world, which was held on April 29th. The e-discussion on using artificial intelligence to tackle epidemic COVID-19 model, which was held on March 31st, and the e-lecture on tackling COVID-19 international best practices and path to the future held on May 12th, which was followed by today's e-discussion on cybersecurity crisis management lessons from COVID-19. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, soon after we first learned about COVID-19 in December 2019, especially the first signs of its outbreak in Wuhan in China, Trends Research and Advisory took the initiative to hold a series of e-lectures, e-symposium, and e-discussion. We invited well-known experts in sociology, economy, politics, energy, health and wellness, and smart technology from around the world to get their insights on how to tackle this pandemic which has turned the world from a global village into one human body and one spread. Dear ladies and gentlemen, through this strategic dialogue forum, and because of our sense of responsibility, we have stressed the importance of foreseeing the future and examining the current international practices in our collective fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. We have also tried to find ways to prepare for challenges going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I would like to once again express our deepest appreciation and gratitude for your generous contribution to our strategic dialogue forum. We promise you that this center of yours will remain at the forefront of regional and international research efforts and initiatives, closely following up on geostrategic and global events relevant to humankind. We have strived to make our world a world of compassion, prosperity, security, safety, and stability. We look for a clean, green environment that is devoid of all forms of terrorism, conflict, poverty, disease, epidemics, and pandemics. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you again soon. Best wishes.